Before we met the 5 members of the Zero Division, speculation was absolutely rampant as to what the division would look like and who might be in it. The only member we knew of prior to seeing them was Kiryu Hikifune, who was promoted just before the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, but that was all we knew. We didn't know who got into the division, or how, or even why. The criteria was completely unknown, and many of us simply speculated that it was a matter of power. After all, they were supposedly guarding the Soul King. Fast forward to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, and well, the answer, as it would turn out, was a lot more interesting and complex than expected. For starters, it turned out that the Zero Division was considerably smaller than people initially thought, being made up of only 5 captains. But it was the induction criteria that was the most fascinating. To be offered a position within the Zero Division, you had to have made a significant contribution to the history of the Soul Society, normally by way of an invention, something that permeates the everyday life of the Gotei 13 and the Shinigami in some form. Something that was recognised personally by the Soul King himself as having made you into a living embodiment of Soul Society history. And of course, that also got people thinking. Who else deserved to be a member of this illustrious yet elusive band? Which character had made a contribution so great that they deserved to be the 6th member of the Zero Division? And perhaps more pertinently, which inventions, over the course of the Soul Society's long history, have been seemingly overlooked? Which feel as though they belong among the pantheon of historical contributions that make up the Zero Division, and why? Well, in today's video, I want to try and answer both questions. Who deserved the promotion? And what about inventions for whom we don't know the creator? Which of those seemingly warrant a spot as well? Let's take a look. Before we get started on today's video, consider hitting subscribe down below. It really does make all the difference and your support is greatly appreciated. And also check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, as well. I'm trying to reach 15,000 subs over there by the end of the year. I have a couple of big videos planned that I'm hoping to get out before the end of the year, so if you do want to help support that channel, consider going and doing so. It does make a massive difference. Okay, so first, let's take a very brief look at the current members of Squad Zero and the inventions or contributions to the history of the Soul Society that secured each of them a place. For what it's worth, I think that 4 of these 5 contributions are totally ironclad, while one of them feels a little less so, though still momentous and important all the same. The leader of the Zero Division, Ichibei Hyosabe, also known as the monk who calls the true name, was inducted into the Zero Division for that very reason. He named, at least according to the man himself, every single thing to exist in the Soul Society, including, but not limited to, the names Zanpakuto, Shikai, and Bankai, just to name a few. Obviously, this is an unparalleled contribution in many ways, especially since, as Ichibei himself notes, power is found in names, and he supposedly named all things within the Soul Society since the dawn of time, essentially, so that's a pretty big deal. Then there's Nimaya Oetsu, also known as the Blade God, who invented the Asauchi, thereby allowing for the creation of the concept of Zanpakuto. Oetsu's contribution is obviously completely transformative for the Soul Society. Honestly, the first forging of the Asauchi may actually be an even bigger deal than Ichibei's historical contribution, as it set the course for the Shinigami forevermore, to the point where I'm fascinated to know how the Shinigami operated prior to Oetsu's creation. Were they even Shinigami in the way we know them today? Such is the magnitude of Oetsu's landmark achievement. From that point on, he literally defined the way Shinigami operate and fight for seemingly the rest of time. While it was never explicitly stated in the manga, it was always fairly obvious from the many contextual clues, the fact that her title is the Great Weaver, as to what Shutara Senjumaru's contribution was, and Kubo would later confirm via Club Outside that yes, the Master Seamstress was responsible for the creation of the iconic Gotei 13 Chihakusho that each and every single member wears. This is kind of an interesting one though. While again, I think this is undoubtedly worthy of a placement among the Zero Division, how can the uniform of the Gotei 13 be acceptable, but not the Gotei 13 itself? Of course, we will dive into that a little later, but it is nonetheless kind of odd to me. The only explanation is that the Shihakusho is much more widespread than we are really led to believe. While other souls may also wear similar garb throughout the Soul Society, I think it's pretty clear that the Shihakusho that we are referring to is very much that worn as uniform by the Gotei 13. To be fair, it is even a little peculiar that the Zero Division also wear what is ostensibly the uniform of the Gotei 13 too, which maybe indicates that it predates the Gotei 13 as an organisation. But then there's the issue that Senjumaru herself came up from the Gotei 13, so the timeline could do with some explanation. Then there's Kiryo Hikifune, the ruler of grain, whose contribution was the Gikon based on her research surrounding the transfer of Reiatsu. Hikifune's invention of the mod soul and the technology behind transferring those souls into bodies and back again paved the way for the Gikongan, which of course is used frequently throughout Bleach to enable Shinigami to operate in the human world using a Gigai. This is an interesting one in my opinion once more. Its creation, again, is definitely worthy of a spot among the Zero Division, but I have to wonder how much use Gikon actually gets for your everyday Shinigami. As readers of Bleach, we are unnaturally exposed to Gikon usage because Ichigo and his friends are human, and so the Shinigami characters need to interact with them as such. For example, Rukia throughout the Agent of the Shinigami arc, or the Hitsugaya Advance team in the Urankar arc. But for your average Shinigami on patrol, they don't seemingly have any need for Gikon whatsoever. They perform their duties in their spirit bodies away from prying eyes. So that is an interesting one, but I definitely think worthy all the same. And then finally, we have the one contribution that maybe doesn't feel totally deserving, and that's Kirinji Tenjiro's invention of Kaido, the healing branch of Kido. Okay, saying it doesn't feel deserving of a spot kind of comes across as a little unfair, and I don't really agree with it. It definitely deserves a spot. After all, essentially creating the foundation for what appears to be Soul Society medicine is absolutely worthwhile of a place. The weird thing about Kaido being on here is, as we discussed pretty recently, is what about whoever developed Kido itself? What about whoever developed Hado or Bakudo? Why don't they get the same level of recognition? Interestingly, I'm fairly certain that the idea wasn't always for Tenjiro to have developed Kaido itself, but to have been promoted due to the creation of his healing hot springs, hence his title still being the Hot Springs Demon, which Kubo then at some point clearly decided wasn't really enough to warrant the promotion, and I agree. And so he later expanded Tenjiro's contribution to simply being Kaido as a blanket creation, which definitely makes way more sense to me. But yeah, while the healing branch of Kido, which would go on to pretty much be the foundation for the entire 4th division moving forwards, is a more than worthwhile, significant contribution to the history of Soul Society, I just feel weird about it because I feel like whoever developed Kido should also be here. And yeah, that goes for the other denominations of Kido as well. Anyway, those are the 5 Zero Division members and what they created in order to gain entry into the Soul King's personal guard. Hikifune herself says that they are each recognised by Reo as being living embodiments of Soul Society history through their inventions, so the creations have to be pretty huge in scope and ramification. So, is there anyone else who could have made the cut based on what we know? Well, truth be told, there are only a tiny number of actual characters with real genuine creations under their belt who could, at least in my opinion, qualify for the Zero Division. And first of all, we've got what is, in my view, the most obvious choice by far, and that's Shigekuni Genryusai Yamamoto for his creation of the Gotei 13. So seemingly obvious is this choice that Kubo himself even responded to a question regarding it very recently on his Club Outside Q&A, stating that the reason Yamamoto wasn't offered a position among the Zero Division for his creation of the Gotei 13 was simply that there had existed a number of organised military groups before the founding of the Gotei 13, but if you ask me, that is flimsy at best. Sure, maybe several Shinigami came together and founded their own ragtag units of soldiers over the years. I can totally see that. After all, the Soul Society was once a completely lawless place, ruled over by these criminal gangs, these thugs, these warlords, where the strongest prevailed with absolute dominance. And where are these groups today? Gone, presumably, with nothing left in their wake but the Gotei 13. Not only is the Gotei 13 the only military organisation to have survived to the present day, at least in any kind of tangible manner, lasting for over 1,000 years by the time of the main story, but it exists as effectively the de facto choice of lifestyle for virtually every single Shinigami to ever live in the Soul Society. In fact, being a Shinigami is synonymous with the Gotei 13. To embody that role, to have that job, you have to go through the 13 Court Guard squads. The Gotei 13 isn't just another organised group of soldiers patrolling the land for something to bully or to kill. It's a way of life and a detailed, principled military arm, the military arm of the entire Soul Society at large, that defines what we, the reader, know of the Soul Society. The truth is that the vast majority of Soul Society iconography is in actuality Gotei 13 iconography. And it's also true that several of the current Zero Division members actually originated from the Gotei 13 itself, yet the organisation that brought them up is somehow exempt. Again, we don't really know enough, but the fact of the matter is that everything, at some point on the chain, flows through the Gotei 13. We don't know anything about the true origin of the Asauchi, but we do know that the Asauchi nowadays are handed to prospective Gotei 13 members in the academy. And again, the Shihakusho appears to be the uniform of, you guessed it, the Gotei 13. Look, the reality is, even if he was offered the job, I don't think Yamamoto would take it. The Gotei 13 is his life's work, and through it, he eventually brought peace and stability to the Soul Society after countless years of bloodshed. It doesn't matter, at least not to me, that the Gotei 13 wasn't the first of these organised military groups. What matters is that it prevailed, it lasted, and it completely transformed and rewrote the Soul Society into what it is today. If that isn't a huge historical contribution, then I don't really know what is. The Gotei 13 continues to persist even after Yamamoto's death, cementing it as the gold standard of power and security across the land, and not something that can only be handled by its founder. Hell, Aizen even explicitly calls Yamamoto the living embodiment of Soul Society history. Where have I heard that before? So, at least in my opinion, Yamamoto is the obvious pick for characters with actual known inventions tied to their name. After him, it does become a little trickier. Naturally, we are drawn to the likes of Kisuke Urahara next, but has he really invented something that makes him a living embodiment of Soul Society history? I'm actually not so sure. There are a couple of inventions of his that I do think are worth considering, though none are exactly slam dunks. Now, Kisuke's reputation as an inventor precedes him, of course, But he's interesting in that rather than develop one all-encompassing creation that really will be a mainstay piece of Soul Society lore and history and tradition moving forward, he is a lot more pragmatic and forward-thinking than that, and instead tends to focus on the here and now, developing things that can be utilized in the moment, in the short term, but don't necessarily have too much scope beyond that. Or to put it slightly differently, they are inventions that are less likely to be used by the wider Soul Society as a whole, and instead have very specific applications. For example, I'm talking things like the Shineyaku pills, which helped temporarily holoify the captains in order to get their stolen bankai back, or his Reiatsu concealing cloaks. Or even the Tenkai Ketchu, which was used to swap out the real Karakura town with the fake one. That's a huge device, and a creation that enabled the entire final showdown of the Rankar arc to take place, but again, it is very much a one-and-done invention. The Tenkai Ketchu's relevance is massive in that one instance, but it's never going to define the Soul Society or shape a piece of its history. It's simply the catalyst for a particularly big battle. So, does Kisuke have any inventions like that? Well, like I said, there are a couple that I want to discuss. For starters, there's the obvious choice, the Hogyoku. Now you could argue this invention actually belongs to Sosuke Aizen, who in his own words came to the conclusion of the Hogyoku before even Kisuke did. Either way though, I don't think the Hogyoku really qualifies, at least not under the circumstances we see in the manga. If the Hogyoku's ability had remained as was originally described, the power to cleanly break down the barrier between Shinigami and Hollow, allowing for the mixing of souls and for essentially widespread and easy hollowification, then yes, I think it would have warranted a spot in the Zero Division. Any device that finally realized the Gotei 13's ambitions of hollowifying Shinigami en masse in a safe and stable way, forever changing and empowering their forces in a way they were quite obviously looking into and researching, is a pretty enormous deal, and one that, frankly, would have altered the course of the entire Soul Society. Now, whether the Soul King would have seen it that way or not remains to be seen, and whether or not he would have appreciated Shinigami and Hollow Souls mixing in that way, or if Ichibei would have done, we don't really know. As it stands though, the Hogyoku is a weird and abstract offshoot, and not something that can ever really be truly applicable to the rest of the Soul Society. Perhaps Kisuke's biggest and most obvious claim, however, at least in my opinion, comes in the form of the Tenshintai, a device that forcibly manifests the spirit of a Zanpakuto in order to massively accelerate one's learning of bankai. Bankai can only be attained, normally, by manifesting your Zanpakuto spirit and forcing it to submit, a process that historically takes roughly 10 years of training. It's an enormous investment, hence why the vast majority of Shinigami never learn Bankai. That, and many of them likely aren't powerful enough. However, thanks to the Tenshintai, that training process, that time investment, is enormously truncated to a ridiculous degree, and instead the process that normally takes 10 years takes just 3 days. However, this is a very dangerous method of attaining bankai. That being said, I can't help but think the Tenshintai would be Kisuke's most likely means of getting into the Zero Division. This device not only totally upends the usual means and time frame for achieving bankai, but even potentially revolutionizes and redefines the relationship between Shinigami and Zanpakuto. Now, this device is supposedly so dangerous that I doubt it would ever be recognized in an official capacity. However, if it were, I definitely think it's enough for Kisuke to be promoted and probably his best chance overall. Mayuri Kurotsuchi feels like he's in very much the same situation as Kisuke where his inventions are concerned. He builds a lot of devices that can be used in the moment and are impressive in their own right, but there's nothing here that truly embodies the essence of the Soul Society itself, nothing that would either make such an impact or be utilised and revered forevermore. Alongside Kisuke's Tenkai Ketchu, Mayuri and the 12th Division were responsible for building the fake Karakura town, but again it falls into very much the same camp as the Tenkai Ketchu. Mayuri's biggest contribution, and the one that would likely be closest to getting him a place in the Zero Division in my opinion, is probably his work with the Garganta, essentially allowing the Gotei 13 to travel freely via the Hollow's own method of traversal, which is a fairly big deal. Although, as is normally the case with Mayuri, we learn that Kisuke has technically achieved it first. And then, of course, speaking of which, both Kisuke and Mayuri have created their own artificial souls. But again, these are generally speaking very personal inventions and are unlikely to really strike a chord with Ryo in that way. Kisuke's also done a lot of work in the field of Gigai technology, and to be fair to him, many of these Gigai are very impressive. From the portable Gigai to the Gigai that drains a Shinigami of their power, rendering them essentially human. However, Kisuke being promoted for one of these specific Gigai technology would be akin to, I suppose, Tenjiro's promotion for Kaido. He's being promoted for an offshoot, as opposed to the real deal. Which leads us nicely into the final part of the video. These are the inventions. Presumably, most of these were invented by somebody that I think definitely warrant a position in the Zero Division, but for whatever reason clearly didn't, and crucially, we don't know who the creators of these inventions ultimately were. And so, following on from that previous statement, Gigai feels like an obvious pick and a good place to begin. Again, this is a little like one of the situations that's currently playing out within the Zero Division, as Kiryu Hikifune was promoted for the creation of Geekon, but Geekon itself and the processes that revolve around it, none of it would be possible, or even thought of, without first the invention of Gigai. Gigai are the doll-like artificial bodies occupied by the Shinigami when they need to both interact with humans and remain in the human world indefinitely. The Gigai is absolutely fundamental to both the lore and occupation of the Shinigami, but also on a meta level to the plot of Bleach as well. The same goes for the likes of Hitsugaya's advance team, and on an even more extreme level, it's thanks to special Gigai that exiled fugitives like Kisuke, Tessai, and the Vizard are capable of remaining in hiding, and the same goes for Ishin, who remained in a Gigai while keeping Masaki's holification at bay. Again, while Kisuke has produced a lot of work in the field of Gigai technology, we have no idea who created the very first Gigai, the concept of Gigai itself, but clearly they felt there was a need for Shinigami to interact with humans at one point, and that resulted in one of the most significant contributions to the Soul Society's history overall. Considering how the Shinigami talk about humans at the start of Bleach, whoever came up with the concept of Gigai was clearly a fairly progressive individual. Up next, we have an invention that again we talked about in detail very recently, so I won't go too in depth here. But of course, it's Kido, the Shinigami magic system, of which again the creator of an offshoot branch was promoted to the Zero Division. As one of the 4 Shinigami combat arts, Kido is a massively significant entry into the lore of the Soul Society. Hell, for all we know, the Shinigami were using Kido to combat Hollows before Oetsu even forged the first Asauchi. Though that's total conjecture on my part, but it's possible. So yeah, the creator of Kido, whoever they are, wherever they might be, absolutely deserves a spot in the Zero Division. Make sure to check out my most recent Club Outside Q&A roundup for a deeper discussion on that idea. Then we have another invention, and I'm assuming this is an invention. I mean, it has to be. But this next one is maybe the single most consequential and deserving on this list. And honestly, more so than any of the others, whoever came up with it absolutely should be in the Zero Division. And that's the Senkaimon. The Senkaimon is, of course, the gateway used to travel between the Soul Society and the human world. There's a gigantic Senkaimon in the Soul Society itself, but every Shinigami has the ability to freely open one of these gates in the human world using their Zanpakuto in order to return to the Soul Society as well. I mean, this one is obvious, right? It allows the Shinigami to do their job just as much as the Zanpakuto. Without it, there isn't really an easy way for them to move between the different worlds. Now, due to the correlation between Senkaimon travel and the Hell Butterflies, it is totally possible that if the Hell arc does happen, we'll actually learn more about the Senkaimon itself. But for now, this one feels very deserving to me. Maybe more so than any of the other inventions on this list. And again, presumably it is an invention, right? Is there any chance this was somehow created by Oetsu as well? That it was somehow built into the Asauchi, which is why every single Shinigami can use their Zanpakuto as a key to unlock the Senkaimon. And perhaps that would explain why Oetsu seemingly has a bespoke and extraordinarily powerful Senkaimon at the tip of his fingers, the Chokaimon, which allows him to send Ichigo back to the human world from the royal palace. I don't know. Total speculation, and probably not correct. But someone had to come up with the ability to pass between worlds. And did this occur soon after the Soul King split the primordial world into 3 separate worlds? Did someone quickly realize, hey, we can actually go between these worlds? I'd love to know more. Next on our list is the Shakon Maku, the protective dome that encompasses the Serete and defends it from outside assault. Or more accurately, I guess it would be the Seki Seki stone that helps form the Shakon Maku in the first place. Due to the properties of Seki Seki, which then make up the defensive membrane, Reishi is unable to pass through it unless it is particularly dense, providing the Serete with a shield at almost all times. This is another one that definitely feels worthwhile to me, though I'm not sure who exactly we would be promoting here. Would it be the person who discovered Seki Seki Stone and understood its properties for the first time? Or would it be whoever realized said stone was capable of projecting the Shakon Maku? Or maybe it would be whoever molded the Shakon Maku into the defensive shield that we see today, as I find it hard to believe it is a totally naturally occurring construct. Maybe this one is a little more niche, as it just protects the Serete, but even so, it is a pretty integral part of the world at this point. Interestingly, those stone walls usually protect the royal palace itself, which makes me think whoever came up with that idea would be more likely to be on Adnias' radar, but maybe not. And then we have the final invention, so to speak, to make the list. And back in the day, those of you who might remember some of my theories while the Thousand Year Blood War arc was releasing weekly may recall that I used to think that Ichibei, prior to the reveal of his actual contribution, would be eventually revealed to have created the ritual of Konso. Konso is the act of a Shinigami helping a soul to pass on from the human world to the Soul Society, the very core of their role in the cycle of rebirth itself. However, while I think this is a significant enough invention to warrant a promotion to the Zero Division, there are a couple of mitigating factors to take into account. For starters, Konso, at least the modern day equivalent, is performed using a Zanpakuto's hilt. So maybe, if Oetsu is building this functionality into his Asauchi, then he is technically responsible, at least for the current incarnation, in the same way he might be responsible for how Senkaimon work. I'm not entirely sure I buy that at all, though, to be honest, and again, the same goes for Senkaimon. The other thing to consider is that, again, in the Hell chapter, Konso Reisai is a brand new ceremony that's just been introduced. So again, like with the Senkaimon and the Hell Butterfly earlier, maybe this is something we might learn more about in the future. Speaking of Oetsu, I was considering including the Sokyoku on this list too, but again, I can't help but feel it's a little too niche. It's clearly an incredible, frankly almost divine creation in its own right, but it's again essentially just an offshoot of Zanpakuto, right? I guess it plays a major role in the judicial system of the Gotei 13, but again, why aren't we just promoting the person who created the Gotei 13 itself? I guess the Central 46 exists outside of the Gotei 13, so in that way, maybe the founder of the Central 46 deserves to be up for promotion as well. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Who do you think deserved a spot in the Zero Division? Which of these inventions throughout the history of Soul Society do you think is the most overlooked? Which one clearly deserved to get its inventor a spot among that elusive highest echelon of Shinigami? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Maybe there is a major one that I missed. If so, please let me know in a comment down below. I would love to read it. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. And of course, an enormous thank you and a massive shout out goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So again, your support does mean the absolute world, and I really, really do appreciate it so very much. Okay everyone, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.